An often overlooked step in the overall install process for any turbo or turbo kit is the priming of the turbo before the initial startup. Arguably, this is the most important step in the overall process because if you don't do it, you do run the chance of damaging your turbo. And this is before you've even driven the car. So you don't want to start the car, even at idle, without the turbo being pre-lubricated with oil. We're going to prime the turbo with some fresh oil before we attach the oil feed line. I do like my Pennzoil Ultra Platinum. I use it on all my cars. I think this is a great blend of overall effective oil for a very reasonable price. Shown here is a cheap plastic syringe. Just going to grab some fresh oil so we can add the oil to our oil feed at the top of the turbo. Our turbo here is an upgraded Precision Gen 2 6266. It is ball bearing and it does have a built-in restrictor. It's not going to accept a large portion of oil. It may appear as though it's pooling at the top, but given a little bit of time, it will start seeping in. And as it does, I'm slowly spinning the wheel, giving it some area for the oil to start lubricating the bearings inside. Next, we're going to go over to our fuse box, and I'm going to remove the EFI fuse. And according to the back of the box, there's two fuses, this large one and then the smaller 25 amp. I'm going to remove both of them. Not sure what the difference is, but I'm going to play it safe. And we're going to crank over the engine without having it start so the oil starts building up pressure and comes through our oil feed line. Be careful removing these. Remember, this is a 20-plus-year-old car. Plastics start degrading over time. They get a little bit brittle. We'll now reattach the negative battery terminal. I've grabbed an old bottle. You never know how much pressure is going to come out of that oil feed line, whether it's going to be a lot or little. I wanted to make sure that I had enough volume in the receiving container to make sure it doesn't splash all over the place. I'm holding the oil feed line at the top of the bottle here while I have my wife turn over, or at least attempt to turn over the engine. Remember, we remove the fuses so it doesn't actually start, but it will prime the oil and I should start getting some pressure through that oil feed line. It took a couple attempts at turning over the engine. We just turned the ignition, gave it a couple seconds, released the ignition, did that, cycled through that process a couple times, and eventually the oil started coming through. But this delay, which is rather significant, at least in our case here, this delay in the oil coming through the oil feed line is what you don't want happening if you haven't primed the turbo. So we know now, one, that oil is coming through the oil feed line, properly primed, you have oil in the line here, and upon startup, we know we have a little bit of oil in the turbo, and we know that the oil feed line is primed, and I'll probably end up doing this again when we're really ready to start the car up. But I wanted to show this process because it is extremely important. Make sure you do this as part of your overall turbo install. You now know that the turbo has oil already in the bearings to help lubricate it upon startup. With that said, I think we're done for today. Thank you very much for joining, and until next time.